evening. Shalom. It's just wonderful to see everybody here. And we are just so pleased to have such a wonderful group of people joining us this evening. My name is Carol Goldsmith. I'm chair of the Lifelong Learning Committee. And basically, we do several programs throughout the summer that are available to the entire Northshire community. And before I introduce our speaker, I just want to mention a couple of these programs. On Sunday, August the 9th, we will have Mark Weitzman with us. He will be speaking about the refugee crisis in Europe. He is the Government Affairs Director with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and he spends much of his year in Eastern Europe studying the situation over there. So he will be with us Sunday, August the 9th, 10 a.m. There will be a light breakfast followed by his remarks.
August 7th.
Excuse me, August 7th, thank you for the correction. The other scholar that we will have with us is Rabbi Norman Pates. He's Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth Shalom in Caldwell, New Jersey. West Caldwell? Cedar Grove, New Jersey. He is a wonderful speaker and orator. He will be with us Sunday morning, September the 11th. Same timing, and check the news guide. We will have articles available in the news guide. I want to thank June Azule and George Kalinsky so much for hosting our speaker. They are very dear friends of Dr. Ernestine Bradley. And we are indeed honored this evening to have Ernestine as our guest. Her topic, as advertised, is German Roots to an American Life, the Impact of the Shoah. Dr. Bradley's book, The Way Home, A German Childhood, an American Life, is about her life, recalling a childhood spent in Passau, Germany during World War II. She came to know wartime dislocations and food shortages, along with the challenge of caring for younger siblings while her mother was ill. The men of her hometown were away at war. However, their absence created an exciting, unexpected freedom, a freedom she sought again at age 21, when, after studying languages at an institute for interpreters and translators, she became a Pan Am flight attendant, which not only gave her entrance to this country, but also allowed her to obtain a green card. Initially, Ernestine settled in Atlanta and went on to receive her undergraduate degree in Romance languages from Emory, then continued on at Emory to earn her MA and PhD in comparative literature. Dr. Bradley's scholarly work, The Language of Silence, West German Literature and the Holocaust, offers an analysis of West German literature as it tries to come to terms with the Holocaust and its impact on post-war West German society. Moving north to teach in the New York, New Jersey area, Ernestine married Bill Bradley, the New York Knicks basketball star, U.S. Senator, and presidential hopeful. A professor of comparative literature at the university level, Dr. Bradley taught first at SUNY Stony Brook and then at Montclair University. Ernestine has also taught Holocaust at the JCC Holocaust Film at the JCC Manhattan and at the New School. Both her personal and professional journeys are journeys of love, perseverance, triumph, and inspiration. Dr. Bradley will also lead a discussion following the viewing of Torta Bluma. So I give you Dr. Ernestine Bradley.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where's your black bag?
Right here, I have to get everything out. Let me say, I feel so welcome here, and it is so wonderful to have the opportunity to speak. First of all, I want to thank Rabbi David, who invited me, who extended the invitation, which I thought was a great honor and a great pleasure. Then I want to thank Carol Goldsmith, the powerhouse, who really brought everybody together with all her energy and her joy. So I appreciate that very much too, Carol. And then I want to thank Al, I don't even see where you are, Felden, who picked me up at the train station in Albany, and we had a wonderful conversation about things to come. And then I do want to thank most particularly, oh my gosh, you don't even.
Well, hold on. Okay, no, you don't have to
All right, all the thank yous you didn't hear? You didn't hear the thank yous? I hope you did. But now I want to particularly thank, all right, like this? All right, oh la la. Okay, I wanted to thank really very, very much June Azulay and George Kalinsky. And I want to say they have opened not only their home to me, but their hearts. And it's very special. Okay, and now we start. What I was told and what the program more or less is that I speak for about half an hour about my growing up in Germany and how I then went on, sort of a little bit expanding on what Carol just had said. And then after about 30 minutes or so, we see the movie Torta Bluma, which is a Holocaust film. And then it's conversations, questions and answers, and whatever you want to ask or need to ask, this is why we are here. So this is sort of the program for the next hour and a half. So let me say, obviously, I was born in Germany during the Nazi regime, and then grew up mostly after World War II, after 1945, in Germany. While I lived in Germany, the Holocaust was not discussed. And I think it was only not discussed by the Germans, and later on, you know, it was interpreted as it should have been, guilt and shame, and they did not want to talk about it. There was a very famous study that then came out about the Germans by German social psychologists that was called The Inability to Mourn. And that was more or less the atmosphere of my teenage years. On the side of the survivors at that time, and I'm now speaking from about 1949 on, or 48, from 48 on you had Israel, from 49 on you had East and West Germany. And so there was not too much except for a few prominent writers like Elie Wiesel, who also had not yet found the language to approach this extraordinary catastrophe. So I think it was for me as a literary person, an inability to find words to express what had happened. That, of course, was not for maybe 2 decades, and now, of course, more and more attempts come out to try to find out what was this, how could this happen? And we are by now in the 4th generation of children, grandchildren, who are still as active and as interested as the first, actually more than the 1st and 2nd generations were that began to address the topic. From my personal point of view, and I want to be sure that Rabbi David knows that I'm trying to make this very personal, I almost hesitate, but yeah, I was lucky that my parents, neither my father nor my mother, were members of the Nazi Party. So it didn't really, maybe, I don't know, maybe it helped me a little bit more to look later on at my parents without the anger that the terrorists then had, or the generation of the 68ers in Germany, who were vociferous and aggressive in their anger at the parent generation for having settled them with such a legacy. And since my references are always literature, there are dozens and dozens of novels then at that time in which the parents are symbolically killed, and just to find a voice to express the anger. But what I then felt, and by that time I was a scholar, as far as the Holocaust was concerned, the technical word is the Holocaust was instrumentalized. That means the Holocaust was used as an instrument instead of having empathy toward the survivors. These people, you know, the 68ers, we all know the 68ers in this country. It was the civil rights movement and Chicago and all these problems. In Germany, the 68ers went against the parents and used, in a sense, almost the Holocaust as an instrument to really aggressively and with full anger attack the parents, that the parents had left this legacy to the younger generation. But what I felt was that in none of these novels was there any empathy for the Jewish suffering. You know, that's why it's instrumentalization. The survivors, or even more horribly, the ones who were murdered, became the instrument to attack the parents. You murderers! But not on what happened to those who did survive, and how can we make up to them. So that took much longer. That took yet another generation. But so from my personal point of view, I could be reasonably, in my ignorance, reasonably okay with my parents. Then after I came to this country, and as Carol said, I came as an airline stewardess. I flew for Pan Am because it was a way of opening up the world. And I had started my studies and I had my foreign languages already, but this was an opportunity. My goodness, you could see the world, which is what I took, you know, with much joy and great pleasure. And then I studied at Emory University in Atlanta. Okay, and the time comes to write in comparative literature. German I never studied, which only in retrospect became interesting to me. Why did I do Romance languages and then comparative literature? On the superficial level, I said, I don't need to study German, I know German. but underneath it, I have oftentimes wondered, I loved French, of course, but maybe it was also a distancing. I tried to get away from Germany, not because I knew about the Holocaust yet, but because I didn't feel comfortable. I wanted out, which I think a lot of young people do. And so then I come to my dissertation topic. And one of my advisors, and we always spoke French, who advised me on the topic of my dissertation, one day he says to me, Ernestine, it's okay that we speak French, but we should really speak German. German? His name was Walter Strauss. I said, Walter, why German? He said, because I, meaning himself, was born in Germany, and I came with my family. Luckily, we made it in '38 to come from Mannheim to Boston at first. Okay, so, and then he began to talk with me about the Holocaust. And in retrospect, I have oftentimes felt that I was lucky again, because I saw him almost as a midwife into the introduction of these atrocities, which you can't just take full confrontationally. And it was almost like a little bit more and a little bit more, and read this book, and have you heard this? So I have always been very grateful to him that he introduced me to this horrendous, I don't know, it's not just one crime, series of inhuman acts, that he was always kind. And I must say, also in retrospect, I have oftentimes wondered how he could have done that. And fortunately, I was never, of course, in the situation, but I think I would have been very angry and explosive. And then I had, as I grew in this field, I had, good Jewish friends who would then say to me, Ernestine, do you think I should go to Germany? What would you do? And I said, I don't know, but I would not go. And then I heard in me the anger that the 68ers had, visited upon their parents. But I have always felt very lucky, maybe because I'm in this country, that I have had contact from the time of Walter Strauss on with many Jews, and it has always been maybe not always loving, oftentimes confrontational, but always open, in the sense that I remember one time I spoke in California, I think it was in San Francisco. They had the big Jewish book fair once a year, and there were many thousand people there, I think. And a woman came up and we spoke, and she spoke in French to me. And then we embraced, and we both started to cry. And we cried for exactly the opposite reasons. She was a survivor, the only survivor left. And I was, whether I wanted to see myself as that or not, I was part of, well, if not the generation, but the child of the generation of the perpetrators. So we both cried and we both hugged. And basically, that was really all we could do. And then, of course, in my professional career, as Carol said, I was a French professor, and then modern languages, and then also German. But my real field of expertise was comparative literature. And in comparative literature, if you had enough enrollment, you could teach whatever you thought was important. And so my professional career, particularly in terms of publications, has really revolved around, not about the Holocaust literature per se, which of course I read, but about, I was interested in the West German way of it's not coming to terms, but of working through, of accepting the Holocaust. And there then I found, and I shouldn't have brought it, but anyway, this is the language of silence that Carol referred to. And it's Schlant, not Bradley, because my professional name at the time, you didn't use your husband's name because you were your own person, right? So I have lectured, I have taught, I have written about how the Germans, I should say, not just the Germans, but the German writers, whom I consider the conscience of a nation, not the politicians for sure, and not the journalists, but the writers. They would write and sometimes not even know what they were writing. And I would then send articles to some of these writers because they're all mostly still alive. And they would respond, oh, I didn't realize that this is what I said, even though the words were right there. And so I was very interested in seeing whether there was any empathy eventually. It wasn't for 2 generations at least. And then slowly and gradually, and also I think under the impact of political events, very tentatively, or maybe I'm overly critical, but very tentatively, some passion, compassion to the survivors and horror about what the parent generation or the grandparent generation had perpetrated came slowly to the fore. I must say, because I have to come back to myself personally, I have been very lucky that I have not only very good friends that are Jewish, but also that in everyday life, you don't even think, is that person Jewish or not? And you just have communications. Whereas even now when I'm in Germany and we talk about it, and there's great openness, not only in my academic papers and interests, but also on the part of non-Jewish Germans in general, that oftentimes the excuse, maybe I'm a little too sensitive, I call it excuse, maybe they would say the reason, that they are not more involved or more knowledgeable about Jews is that there are so few in Germany, so that the contact of non-Jews with Jews is very rare, which of course is true. And I don't know whether you have a film program here, but at the JCC for many semesters, I did Holocaust films to find, where the pulse is and how the Holocaust is viewed in any number of films across, Israeli-German co-productions, French-Israeli co-productions, and whatnot. It's very international now, mostly Western European. And there is one film that I want to mention that's called Just an Ordinary Jew. And what that film, or what the title meant, and it's very claustrophobic, it's an hour and a half of one person ranting and raving in the apartment, in his apartment. And it's a German film, and he is a Jew and had been asked by a German high school to come and speak to the non-Jewish high school students about what means being a Jew in Germany. And he had been asked to go to schools frequently. And he felt he had enough. He just wanted to be an ordinary Jew and not an exhibition person or object who would go and make German non-Jewish children feel whatever, knowledgeable about the Holocaust. So, you know, it's an aspect that many German grown-ups and children, they don't get it. They learn in college, in high school, in school about the Holocaust, even sometimes in 3 different subjects in the same academic year. But it is, in my opinion, or maybe I'm a little more critical than the Germans because I don't have patience with their excuses, maybe. But I feel that they are, they want to know, and the children want to know, and the teachers have special training to teach the Holocaust. But it's an academic subject. It's not a living subject. It's not like when you walk out into the street, there are people who are Jews, and they are people, and not objects of contemplation and of awe and maybe of feeling guilty. So, and maybe I'm a little bit rougher because I feel so much more comfortable here. And, you know, and in Germany there is still to some extent this aura of, you know, we have to be specially nice and we have to be specially understanding, and it's all a little artificial. But at least I would say, yeah, these are very valid attempts. And this is one thing that maybe I should also mention, I don't want to speak too long. The German identity, I should say the West German identity, meaning from about 1949 until reunification, 89, 90, in the early 1990s, when the clashes came with the East German view of the Holocaust between the East and the West Germans. That was like a riptide. It was so contrary and such a point of argument. But so they became much more open now in the 3rd, 4th generation, and there are many groups that young high school kids that work to clean up or get concentration camps into museums, you know, which in itself is an absurdity. But yes, they are trying to do that, and there are a lot of government efforts, like I am on the board of this Aktion Sühnezeichen, Action Reconciliation, where German post-high school kids come to Jewish communities over here. There are many, many different ways. And if you have been to Berlin, you know, there are the Stolpersteine, those little, what do you call them, the stumbling no, I want the word for Steine, stones that you stumble in the street, and they carry the names of the people who lived there and who were taken to the camps and killed. So German identity, and I would say maybe even in the last 20 years, it has been said by historians and sociologists and anthropologists that German identity is really inconceivable without the Holocaust. That the Holocaust has become part, even if it's an abstract understanding, but it has become part of the German self-conceptualization. And yeah, I mean, I find it, yeah, of course positive, but I wished it was also a human context. But I can understand for those 200,000 Jews or 250,000 Jews that live in Germany now, they cannot become the models to instruct the Germans that the Jews are people, you know, which is what it basically for me would imply. And yet also what has been brought forward, and I do agree, is that there is really no country that has made its crimes the objects of museums and memorials and stumblestones. There is no, I don't know whether you know any country that would bring its own crime so much to the foreground and therefore absorb it as its part of its identity. And I must say, even, we talked a little bit about it during dinner with Rabbi David. I feel very much that Angela Merkel, when she invited or opened the borders for 1 million Syrian refugees, that would not have been conceivable without the Holocaust and her specific personal background. She, you know, she's always been known as this very deliberate, slow politician who wouldn't jump to conclusions, who would really deliberate before she does anything. But but she spontaneously, is this too loud now? Yeah. Is this a little better? I can hear it's very loud. No. Is it good? Is it good now? Yeah. Okay. I think without her background, this was a moment of total spontaneity. And I think within 2 minutes, she had a lot of politicians being totally upset about her. And yet she said, we are going to do it. Because she comes from a family. Her father was a Protestant minister. And during the Nazi regime, of course, the Catholic Church had the Concordat with Hitler anyway. And the Protestants had the Reichskirche, meaning the Protestant, those who also cooperated with Hitler. And then there was a small group that was called Die Bekennende Kirche, the Confessing Church, and they were in opposition and ended up in concentration camps and were killed. And her father, although they were in Hamburg, and she was a year or two old, when he decided he was going to go to the GDR, to East Germany, so that the Protestant church would continue to be a kind of a bekennende Kirche, a church that does not fall for a dictatorial regime. And of course, the GDR was very much a communist dictatorship. And so this is how she grew up, with this father who brought the whole family over there to keep alive a kind of an opposition to communism. And I think when the refugees came, she knew that there had been the refugees trying to not be refugees in Germany, lucky if they were refugees, and maybe didn't even have places to go. So I think in a sense she was motivated by a memory of the Holocaust and that this will not happen under her chancellorship. And I must say, I really do admire her for that very much, even though now, you know, we don't know what's going to happen with the Brexit, and I was very upset, and then maybe I should stop. I was very upset with the British vote. I don't understand enough politics, so it wasn't really that, but what very much upset me was that Germany, West Germany, from right after 1945, after the end of the Second World War, had always tried to integrate itself into larger communities. It started very simply with the cooperation between France and Germany in the so-called Montan Union. It was the iron ore of the Ruhrgebiet where they started to cooperate. Then, of course, there was the Cold War, and Germany was being asked to join NATO, which Germany gladly did. But Adenauer was smart enough to negotiate and said, yeah, we are all now criminals, and our military is not good at all. David, stop.
No,
I need to stop.
Not at all. What I'd like you to do, no, stand here.
Yeah,
Speak more closely to this without moving around.
but I thought it
So-
was too loud.
No, it was just right. And then you were moving away from it.
Oh,
And then he was standing up, and so no one could hear you. And I can't do anything about it if you're going like...
Absolutely.
Right?
No.
I mean, so can you hear her now? Can you hear her in the back row? Yes, say something.
I shall hold on.
Not that loud. Okay.
I'm learning from the rabbi. I saw him at one point holding on like this. So maybe I'll... Is it not too loud to anybody?
Now it's too loud. Just stand there, don't lean in, and talk. Please. Bitte.
I'm trying my best. No. As a mother, sometimes, when my daughter would say, I did my best, I would say the best is not good enough. So the best is not good enough, is it? Or please raise your hands,
A
or...
little closer. A little closer. Say something.
All right, right here?
Right there.
Okay, all right,
Don't move anything.
okay. All right. We were briefly talking about Angela Merkel and about NATO, and from NATO it went to the European Common Market, and after the European Common Market it was the EU. And before that, of course, the euro was already pushed through under German leadership and desire. And all of these integrative moves had, even though Germany is economically, again, very prominent, but all these moves had as their attempt to fuse Germany into a larger European compound. And so I was truly upset that now with Brexit, that compound could conceivably fall apart. The nationalisms may tear this union, which maybe wasn't on its strongest legs, but still it was a workable union. So that has upset me very much for the Germans. I'm no longer German, obviously, but for the Germans and for Angela Merkel as a leader, it has upset me that all of this may unravel, and it would really be 50 or 60 years of building something. So I think maybe my time is up. Rabbi David?
It's your program. You want to show the film, which is 20 minutes.
Right, exactly.
And then after we show the film, you're going
Exactly.
So do you want to introduce the film?
All right, I just want to say something very briefly. And Rabbi, you have to press the, you have to do that. Of the great responsibility. The movie is a 20-minute short. It takes you right into a concentration camp. It is a very tough film, I think. It was made by a filmmaker who was only, and this I find very interesting, he was born in 1964, 20 years basically, after the Holocaust. And the film was made in 2005. The filmmaker, his name is Benjamin Ross, and he was born in London. I don't know the background history where his parents came from. I would assume they were refugees, but I can't find anything. So, born in '64, the film in 2005. By that time, he is a 41-year-old mature British person. And yet the Holocaust has to be worked out. I don't want to say more about the film right now because I hope we will have a good discussion afterwards. All right. Are there any questions?
Well, if you were teaching this film, how would you discuss what just happened in terms of adding a short chapter in such a brief way, but so powerfully encapsulating the horror of the experience for a man who just brought his father to his death and still is back having to protect his own life by serving the Commandant in
Right.
a kind of slavery.
Yeah. Well, I would probably not speak from my heart because the film is speaking, and I would want everybody to, well, dig in their souls to find what they think, and I'm sure everybody would have different opinions. I think just as a film, and when you think the filmmaker was 41 years old and this was done 10 years ago, I think it's basically a very conflicted film. The narrative is very obvious. You know, the narrative, you have the Commandant, you have the slave laborer, you have this subaltern of the Commandant, but at the same time he is a supervisor. He is watching the Commandant as much as he is watching the don't want to say slave, the slave laborer.
Because he's a slave to stay alive.
Yeah, I know, but the words, you know, the language is just very painful to have to use that. But so I would say the story, basically the hierarchy of these four characters is very obvious. But what happens is the subaltern, or whatever you want to call him, who watches the Commandant, is probably the only unambiguous character. You know, he is the killer. Cold, machine-like, totally given to what his task is. And in a sense, he represents what we mostly understand about concentration camps. But what I think the filmmaker is introducing is these conflicts. First of all, the Commandant, he is, I would say, a hedonist, totally a hedonist. He likes his marmalade and he eats it no matter what is happening around him or how he gets it. But at the same time, he is, maybe because he is a hedonist, he is not a brutal killer. You know, if he were simply as cold as his aide is, the aide de camp or whatever, he would just go and do whatever he feels like. But he constantly contradicts himself. And I'm not quite sure what the filmmaker wants to say with it. Does he want to say that the Commandant has a human side? I'm not so sure. You know, the first scene, he is working, and there is the symbolism, and then I have wondered whether I'm taking refuge in symbolism. I focus on the symbolism so I don't have to, you know, think more and again about the atrocities. But the symbolism is, you know, he's working painstakingly, and in a sense it's almost the best of what the Germans do. you know, very minute, very meticulous, very attentive, very careful in his work. But then at the same time allowed to blow his temper if things don't work his way. I don't know, is this supposed to be a German characteristic from an English filmmaker's point of view? And then there is the music. I don't know whether you notice there is in Germany, particularly, I know from Munich, but in Salzburg, the tradition of the Great World Theater, and you have the figures, and you see them even here walking out like puppets, and they go on a round tray. And the Commandant says at one point, "We go only once." And the music, how do you, I don't know, a Glockenspiel. There are some German speakers here. What do you call? The chimes, right. It's a very well-known melody that goes with these puppets, if you want to, that are really cut wood, which is what the captain or the commandant does in the beginning. He makes one of these figures. So I am not sure about my own interpretation, because I would like to think that the filmmaker is trying to embed this. We are only going through this once. We are only living once. We are only fulfilling a role. And there is really nothing once we are on this wheel. We cannot get out. And I don't want to believe this, because it speaks against the horror. We all would like to know that we can do something about the horror. And we are not just puppets on this wheel. So I would like to say that the filmmaker isn't right, because I can't quite make sense of it. No, we are not puppets on the wheel. But the film shows in a larger context that the characters are, and at one point where the father and the son, you only see them walking behind each other. Oh, yeah. You know, where you see the father and the son walking behind each other, they are shot as if they were these puppets. So that's my conflicting point. The fact that the Commandant had enough, I don't even want to say humanity, that he accepted the torture, the jam a second time. I don't know how positive this is, but it's an attempt, and it's almost a temptation to misread, because the Commandant is not a good person either, even though he seems to protect the slave laborer, but only for his own purposes. And of course, the Konditorei, I don't know whether you saw that little label on the glass. It said Konditorei Blumer, that the Konditorei was where the father owned. It was a pastry shop. And the jar is from the pastry shop. And of course, then the son gets it, and now he can give it to the Commandant, who starts to eat it. So the torte was, you know, the tart, the first one that the prisoner, I don't want to call him slave laborer.
Blau. His name is Blau.
Blau, I know, okay, Blau. The first time he gives him that torte, it's a torte, but since it has the ants in it, it's not edible. And so then comes the real jam, but it's no longer a torte, you know, the torte is gone. So I would much rather see what you feel, because as horrible as the movie is, and as loving as the father-son relation is, I think the filmmaker is not quite right and left. He is introducing some humanity that isn't really humanity, as far as I'm concerned.
Where's the first question again? Okay, Phil?
Off the subject of the movie, could you talk a little bit about your recollection of the Nuremberg Trials?
Okay, the question was, off the subject of the movie, could you talk about your recollections of the Nuremberg Trials?
Well, I hate to say not really. Well, I can say I was too young, but I should know what my parents said, you know. And there was a lot of discussion, that's true. But I did not really, you know, I was a kid, so I knew that there was these upsetting things going on. But I must say, you know, in my little memoirs, I write about it. For me, much more upsetting was the end of the war and the ambivalence I heard. Were we defeated or were we liberated? And that ambivalence I grasped, because as a kid you want to know it's either this or it's that. So the Nuremberg Trials seemed to be a court that was doing justice. I didn't really know who the criminals were, but it was justice that was being done. Whereas the end of the war, defeat or liberation, that is what really set me, made me not so much uneasy, but doubting. Yeah.
Barbara? I just had a note that I was thinking of in the ambivalence of the film. The Commandant doesn't succeed in getting the hand from the dog. He doesn't, he keeps trying, you know, with the, he failed. Yeah.
With his work, you mean his, yes, yes. And so your question is?
So it's another ambivalence. He doesn't succeed. Nobody is succeeding.
Yes, yes. You know, so but somehow there's something in me that isn't comfortable with simply saying the filmmaker showed how all of this is very unconcluded and ambivalent, and he's showing conflicting emotions and actions, and maybe this was true for a small segment. But overall, I think most of us think that in the concentration camps there were no human thoughts left. And that's where I also feel the ambivalence. I don't know, that's really not an answer, I think, but that's all.
It's a question.
Well,
Like everything.
Yes.
I'm surprised you don't remember, you and I are 1 year apart, we were there at the same place at the same time, that you don't remember from the Nuremberg Trials. They were on the radio for hours and hours. You remember the refrain? To be hanged by the neck. To be hanged by the neck all day long. To be hanged by the neck. I'm surprised to see.
yeah, well,
The question
I'm
was
sorry.
that she's surprised that Ernestine did not remember the Nuremberg Trials since they were a year apart, and that the refrain on the radio was, "You'll be hanged by the neck" over and over again.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm sorry. And you say there was radio. I was not much at home. I was out in the street.
Yes, right here.
But it's not an answer, I know.
I don't have a question so much as going back to what you originally said before the movie about the Jews in Germany and then afterwards, after the war. Because I was born in Germany, and I can remember, we came in 1949, and I can remember my mother saying in the United States, I wasn't a Jew, I was a German. when Hitler came, all of a sudden, I was a Jew. I came to the United States, and then I was a German again. I think what the point is that I think, for my opinion, what this, again, differentiating between Jews and Germans, is that the Jewish community in Germany was so ingrained. There was no difference between Germans and Jews. They were Germans. And it wasn't until Hitler came that it became a problem. And I think now, again, trying to introduce Jews to Germans is again differentiating them. They're not Jews, they're Germans. One is a nationality and one is a religion. And I think that's the problem.
I wish it were just that, yeah. You know, I would say, and it is true, and that is part of the tremendous catastrophe, that the most loyal Germans, and I'm now speaking about the Weimar Republic, which was truly, exactly, and then into the, exactly, that they felt they were, and they were the most loyal Germans, exactly, but from Hitler's point of view then, they were ostracized, even though they were the best. And when you look at the legal procedures, I mean, it means not that much, but it's also, because it's also messy. But when Hitler started with all the anti-Jewish laws and the Aryan laws and whatnot, and so many of the civil servants that were Jewish, lawyers, whatever, had to immediately not only resign, they were let go. He made special provisions for a few years for the Jewish World War I veterans, because Hitler was a World War I veteran. So he felt still some kind of half, whatever, not affinity, but yeah, these Jews were soldiers, they were Germans, they fought for Germany in the First World War. And therefore they were entitled to pensions for another couple of years until the middle, I think, of the Second World War. But from a point of view of a Jewish, or I should say of a German identity, it's horrible. Yeah, exactly. Fred Stern, who was a professor and a provost at Columbia University, and he came from Breslau originally. He died a few weeks ago now, and one of the books he wrote was called The 5 Germanys I Lived. And he was 90 years old a few weeks ago when he died. And to think that within one lifetime, Germany changed 5 times from Weimar to reunification, you know, it's, and that the Jews in particular were caught in that maelstrom. I mean, the Germans to some extent too, particularly the East against the West Germans. But the maelstrom is an identity crisis that I don't know how each individual can solve it. And there are lots of Jews now in Germany who do not necessarily consider themselves German, Israeli or whatever, but they prefer to live in Germany.
Yeah.
Dr. Bradley, is it true today, from what you know, that Germany has the largest increase in Jewish population in the European Union? That is, the Jewish population in Germany today is roughly the fastest growing, perhaps, population of Jewish communities in the EU. And the second follow-up
Well, hold on, let me get this on tape for the GNAT back there. The question was, does it have the fastest, Germany have the fastest growing population of Jews in the European Union? And the second question?
The second question is, in the under age 40 group, roughly under age 40 group in Germany today, how would you describe their attitude towards the Holocaust and the period of Nazi Germany with respect to those older than them? Thank you.
The second part of the question was people who are 40 or under, how do they relate to the Holocaust given those who came before them and how they related to it?
In answer to your first question, yes. The Jews are the fastest, in Germany, are the fastest growing group. In part, it has to do with the Soviet, well, by that time no longer Soviet, the Russian Jews, when they left in 1990, with Gorbachev and the Soviet Union falling apart, they had the choice, the Russian Jews, to either go to Israel, some came to this country, and some went to Germany. A large number went to Germany because Germany was very, liberal isn't the right word, generous isn't the right word, but they provided social services that the other countries did not or could not provide. And it was, in a sense, an act of Wiedergutmachung, of also paying reparations. There are Jews coming back. There is no question that we help them as best as we can. The number is a little bit difficult to ascertain. You read different statistics. They change between 200 and 300,000 Jews living in Germany now, not all of whom are German. Some of them are still Russian. A number is Israelis. And it's also difficult to count them, and this is one question I haven't gotten an answer to yet. But there are many, particularly coming from Russia, that are no longer practicing Jews. They are religiously atheists, which means when they came to Germany, they did not join Jewish communities. And the Jewish communities are one source of getting the numbers, how large the population is of Jews in Germany. So all the ones that are not part of Jewish communities, or even in intermarriages, I think there are no hard numbers how many there are actually in Germany now, but the minimum is 200,000, which is a fairly large number when you think that at the heydays of the Weimar Republic, the Jews, all these very fervent Germans, were about 500,000. That's all. Compared to now, not an overwhelming number, and I was very stunned when I first came across that number. The second question, the people of age 40, above and below age 40, and what was the precise question?
How are they relating to the history of differently from their parents and people? The people of 68, which are probably their parents, grandparents at this point, and this generation.
Well, I would, the ones who are 40 now, they were born in the 60s, so they are maybe
In the 70s.
Yeah, 70s even, yeah, right. I think in that generation, because they are so far removed from the actual atrocities, they are much more open in trying to find out, who are the Jews, what happened. And it is in this age group that in these younger than 40 or even 30, that you find a lot of young people who work and try to make amends and go to Israel. Israel has a lot of, from the 80s on, so the people would now be a little bit older than 40, but a lot of young people, Germans, went and worked in kibbutzim, which,
The movie Walking on Water.
Exactly, has anybody seen Walking on Water? Yeah. Which was a feel-good movie, but the fact that were these young people going to Israel is a fact, and it means something, maybe numerically not very much, but certainly it shows a trend, it shows an interest, and I would think that these people who went and worked in Israel, I certainly admire and respect, as opposed to the tourists, the German tourists, who apparently, you know, swarm up and down the coast and just go there for tourism without any deeper desire to find out why Israel there now. It has beautiful beaches, so they go. But that is an older generation. It's the younger one that really wants to invest itself.
I'm going to take 2 more questions. Yes, ma'am, right there in the pink.
As you were growing up during the war, what were you thinking when your Jewish neighbors were disappearing or being rounded up and taken away by the Nazis?
Yeah.
When you were growing up during the war, what did you think when your Jewish neighbors were being rounded up and disappearing?
You know, and I looked at the lady in front of you who said, why don't I remember the Nuremberg Trials? Because my answer is, I'm embarrassed to say that my answer is the same. I don't even know that there were Jews living in that town. The town was Passau. I then, of course, after the war, and particularly when I came to the United States and then went back and questioned my parents, they obviously did know. And I said to my mother, I said, you're not telling me that there were no Jews in Passau? What happened to them? You know, and she then gave the answers that her whole generation would give and say, yeah, and they had that big department store and they were always so nice to me. And they even, you know, when I bought something, they always gave me a little extra. And I said, well, and what happened when they were gone? What did you say? Or where did they go? Well, we don't know. One day they just weren't here anymore. And you know, this is where I can understand how the 68ers exploded. Or my father, who was in the Air Force, and he one time, I said to him, I mean, you didn't know what was going on? You were in the military? And he said, yeah, I knew. One time I was in Berlin and there was a bench and this elderly couple sat on it, but they were only allowed to sit for an hour or so, you know. Benches had marks how long the Jews, until what time they could sit there. I said, well, what did you say? And he said, well, I gave them my ration cards. Okay. But, you know, a ration card doesn't satisfy this horrible that he watched it, and there was nothing that he did or anybody else did. But that's all I can tell you. I'm so sorry.
Time for one more. Yes, right here, Morgan.
So I was in Germany 2 years ago on a trip through actually Action Reconciliation, the Germany close-out trip. And then I was on a trip last month. Well, I was living in Israel, and I went from Israel to Poland for a week, and then back to Israel. And one of the things that the Polish, we spoke with a lot of young adults in Poland about their experiences as Jews in Poland now. And one of the things they said is that in Germany, they have the people that they know in Germany, they're in schools, they've been like, the Holocaust has been like pounded into them, you know, like that this is what happened in your country and your grandparents were involved in this, and like that they feel a lot of like blame, and they begin to resent their country, but also the Holocaust and learning about it, and they don't want to know any more about it because they feel that it's like pounded into them. Have you found that in any of your experiences?
The question, Morgan was just in Poland and in Israel talking about, in Germany, many of the students feel like the Holocaust has been pounded so far into their consciousness educationally that they resent it.
Yeah, you know, I would like to know, you spoke about Poland first, and of course, unfortunately, in the former East Germany, there is not only xenophobia, but anti-Semitism. And so if you come from Poland, I would say that the former East Germans may be more hostile. Among the former West Germans, I have not noticed that. You know, if anything, or when I come, they say, oh, yeah, there you come again, and don't always ask questions, and they get a little bored with my questioning, but it's not a hostile boredom. Whereas I think the further east you go, it becomes anti-Semitic. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what can we say that, except that we're grateful that you came and that you took all these questions. And that obviously, the Shoah is not something that the Jewish people have recovered from yet, and it'll take, if they ever do. And in a way, I want to acknowledge your bravery at coming and speaking about your experience, because I think your question had a lot of pain in it still, and I want to recognize that pain. And I want to give the last word to Carol. Carol, why don't you come up here, and then in a moment, we're going to have that curtain behind you open up, and there's some refreshments, and Ernestine will be around for a little while to answer any further questions you have. So, Carol.
Ernestine, I just want to thank you so much for being here. I know you'll be available for more questions. And please do join us in the back and watch the news guide and posters around town for our further events as we publicize them. So it's usually a few weeks before. Thank you so much for coming.